It's a pleasure to be here, and I have to thank Dr. Garg right over here of inviting me to come and share some of our experiences that we have gone through in the North American shale revolution and how we have taken that understanding and taken it to other parts of the world like Argentina, Mexico, Poland, Saudi Arabia, China, and Australia. And the interesting thing that I'm going to share with you is that not everything that has worked in US works in other places, and conversely, something that doesn't work in the US works in other places. And I will share that information with India as the context of discussion. Without further delay, we will go ahead. Now, one thing that, I think Dr. Chandra, Dr. Meg, and Dr. Ellis has done an excellent job in setting the ground and understanding what shale oil and shale gas is all about and the history behind it. I'm going to take a little bit different path. I'm going to share experiences that people like yourself in the audience might want to consider as you embark into your shale development. By the way, those of you who do not know, Baker Hughes is one of the 3 largest oil field service companies working in more than 80 countries throughout the world, including India. Now, so the success that we have seen in North America, the first question I'm going to try to address, can it really travel? Which means some things which I've already said, some things in North America really are unique to North America. They are essential to are they essential to the success of the place? Some of them are, but not all of them. So, what should our biggest concern be, and how should we address them as we embark into a new country with a new sets of parameters of the shale that we're dealing with? I'm going to cover these areas. I'm not going to repeat all this, going all the way from well cost, availability of land leases, service company capabilities, infrastructure, and all the way to what kind of a talent and skills are going to be needed that we need to prepare in order to address them. I'm not going to spend any time right over here. Again, this all has been talked. Basically, I highlighted 3. The ones in yellow are the ones you hear about it most, and the others that you don't. But bear something in mind, okay, that wherever there is conventional hydrocarbon, there is the possibility of a source rock being there, and there could be some of the shale development that we may not have considered. So just bear that in mind. Now, well cost is ranked as one of the most significant costs in spite of few wells being drilled. See, what happens as you move away from, in North America to begin with, now the well cost is anywhere between $5 to $7 million a well. That's not what it was when it got started in 1982. It used to be like $10, $15 million at that time. So what has really done is that mass drilling has brought the cost down. Dr. Chandra made a very good point about shale wells being 1.5 to 2.5 times a regular conventional well. But I have to caution you, that's when you get into a mass drilling. If you are still doing a well here and a well there, that may not be the case. Now, I think this point has already been touched, so I'm not going to be making a lot of points, with the exception that a lot of people bring out environmental issues, okay, because that's a crutch that is used because of what we call is the revenue that the people get from land leases. Just to give you an example, I was in Pennsylvania in 2011, and there are protesters, about 200 of them saying no fracking, and there was 5 of them on the other side in support of fracking. That was 2011. In 2013, there was a similar one, and I was present there. The crowd switched. People with no fracking was 5 or 10, and people with fracking was 200. So I went to those people, I said, well, what happened? He said, look, my wallets are pretty fat now. Okay, so see, the financing and the dollar value changes things, okay? So what some of the things are being done in countries where you do not get any compensation is to provide back to the community. A lot of the companies that are going into Poland, going into China, okay, are essentially doing proactive education of the benefits. They're creating schools, they're creating roads, and explaining how it can positively impact. So you have to certainly keep that in mind. Moving on, service company capabilities. not every country has a lot of different service companies. So when all the service companies are not present, that means the prices are not competitive. So it will be up to you in your own countries to bring in as many competitors that you can, because that is the way these prices are going to be, you can lower the prices. One of the key things is going to be creating an environment in which many technologies are used and tested over and over again. That's how pad drilling, already mentioned, factory drilling, factory completion may have an impact. Now, wide experience with high volume horizontal wells and high levels of hydraulic fracturing is also important to reduce further cost. This is what I see. Take a look at this slide. All I want you to take away from this particular slide is a huge number of wells are needed to develop shale wells. Over here, there is a wide range, but it shows the typical scenarios about 200 to 250 wells are needed to develop 1 TCF of gas. So a lot of hundreds and hundreds of wells are going to be needed to develop a lot of these tight shale source rocks or unconventionals. Now, let's move away from North America and let's come to individual countries, whether it is China or whether it is India. We see that IOCs and NOCs are unlikely to be willing to drill the huge numbers of unsuccessful wells drilled in prior plays in the U.S. In U.S., the independents do statistical drilling. Okay? Okay, this one works, fine. This one doesn't work, let's move on. So do not think that the IOCs and NOCs are going to be doing that. But the IOCs and NOCs are doing something very important, which I'll come in just a second. So far, there's not a whole lot of proof that there are ways of figuring out besides statistical drilling. There are some exceptions I think we're starting to learn, and I'll share that with you. So the North American activities are unlikely to be repeated in other parts of the world for a number of different reasons, which I listed before, and I'll briefly go through. Now, real technology advances is required to make the global plays of commercial development. And this is taking place with IOCs and NOCs. See, almost all IOCs and NOCs have partnered with the independent companies in the US just for one reason, is to see what works and what doesn't work. And they are, as they find that out and go to their own country, they are not doing statistical drilling. They're using technology. And I'll show you an example how the technology can essentially lower your cost at the end of the day. Bear in mind, because of the high cost of the wells, the margin of shale development is rather small. So you have to do it right. You cannot have too many wrong wells and too many wrong frac stages. So now let's take a closer look to the shale revolution. This is a survey not done by Baker Hughes. This is done by 2 other separate companies in US. What did they find? They found 7 out of 10 wells did not reach their production targets. 6 out of 10 frac stages were ineffective. And you know how many wells are drilled in the US? On an average of 15,000 unconventional wells with almost 400,000 frac stages every year. So if you calculate out, you'll see that we're talking billions of dollars that are not being productive. So when these same operators were asked, why are you not getting such good, not so good results? 3 out of 4 pointed out, we don't know enough about our subsurface. So of course that makes sense. That clearly makes sense, is that means the wells and the frac stages are probably not being placed in the right places. So the point over here is that these shale reservoirs in general have sweet spots. Some of these sweet spots could be 10,000 acres. Some of these sweet spots could be hundreds and thousands of acres. But there should be a way to find out how to get the sweet spots. So here, something that you'll be able to appreciate over here, sweet spots. No matter what your sports is, every one of them with a tennis racket or a baseball bat or a golf club, they all have a sweet spot to get that perfect shot. And how can I walk away from this slide not addressing the big win India had yesterday? So does the cricket bat. You know, in order to get the sixer, you have to hit the ball in the right place. So the point over here is that there's a sweet spot also for the shale wells. But it's a different way how you get around to it. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but there are certain things like TOC, brittleness of the rock, thermal maturity, reservoir pressure, and to a certain extent permeability. When all those things fall in one place, that's the sweet spot. So I'm going to be, and sweet spots can easily vary. So I'm going to show you some field examples of projects that has been done to fully understand these kind of methods. So the way it works, I'm going to show you an example. Again, sweet spots are not contiguous. I'm going to show you an example from Haynesville Shale. Basically what you're doing is your pilot wells that you're drilling to understand your field. You're essentially doing a lot of logging and coring and measuring your TOC, reservoir pressure, brittleness, thermal maturity, permeability, on and on. And then you tie those properties to your 3D seismic and spread it out. When all those properties coalesce into one place, in this particular map, it is that magenta color. So wherever I see the magenta color spots, that's my sweet spot. As I said, some of them could be 10,000 acres, some of them could be 100,000 acres. Okay? So to prove these concepts, we started now we're doing a number of other projects, but in this particular case, we said, okay, we'll go to the magenta over here and drill, pick out 8 well locations, and then we're also going to pick 8 wells in the area which is not so sweet spot. And then these test wells, vertical wells, are going to be identical. They'll have identical frac so that we can make a good comparison. So what you're going to see in the next page is the results. Here you can see these are the wells in the sweet spots. And all the wells in this ellipse right over here is what I'm calling not so sweet spots. Now take a look at the production. Here are the production of all the not so sweet wells, sweet spot wells, and here is the production of the wells that are in the sweet spot. So now this technique is being applied in Saudi Arabia, in China, and in Australia. So, and this is what the majors and the NOCs and IOCs are catching on, because this can allow them not to just drill wells and not have very good wells. Moving on, I think some of these points have already been addressed. So I'm going to focus on the last point, which is how do I eliminate ineffective frac stages and non-commercial wells. I showed you the examples of where I should put the proper wells. Now even if I put a proper well, there are certain places I should put frac stages and certain places I should not. The current practice is, as mentioned earlier, you go put what's called geometric. Every 250 feet you put a frac stages. And that's why we see 6 out of 10 are in the wrong place, or maybe should not have been there, period. So here is a technique of using high definition LWD imaging on your horizontal lateral. Basically it's showing if you have a fault like we're seeing right over here, stay away. This is not the place you need to put a frac stage at all, because you're going to lose it or you might end up having a water well. If you have a presence of good natural fractures, that's where you can create complex fracture geometry, and that will give you a good area and a good production. A lot of times we see this kind of fractures, which is fractures created due to somebody, an hydraulic fracture in another well. I would not recommend that you frac right over here unless this happens to be your neighbor's well. Then again, you see the nice fracture distribution. This would be a good place to put a lot of fractures. Quite often, we see at the end, at the toe of the well, that it's very unproductive because the lithofacies has already changed. So there's no point in putting frac stages. So now you can see, if I go geometric frac every 250 feet, I'm going to end up putting frac stages where it is not going to be productive. So this method is, in our office, we call it surgical frac. That means, you essentially put it where it needs to be. Moving ahead, here's an example from the Marcellus. Take a good look at the spacing of each of the frac stages. Do they look like they're all even? They're not. As you can see, some spacing are different than the other spacing, because over here we have put frac stages in the proper places. Fluid flow from these heavily tight shale reservoirs and complex fracture network, modeling is not that easy. But a lot of work is being done. We have done a lot of work with Stanford University, and here is to just give you an idea where the modeling work is heading. What you can see right over here in red bars is the model prediction of what each frac stage should do, and the blue is what has been actually measured. By no means I'm suggesting that this is a perfect match, but I think the trend is there. So I think the understanding, the industry is starting to understand the flow mechanism of these wells. Of course, these kind of a modeling, we have to tweak it as you move from one basin to the other. So if it requires to predict in some of your reservoirs, it will need to get some tweaking done. So I'm going to quickly move on from this slide and quickly share with you what happens when you don't do it right, okay? Here is an example from Eagleford. What you're looking at over here is this is the monthly production, and the horizontal scale is the cumulative production. And the top line is the P90 line, and the bottom one over here is the P0. So basically what this is showing is that as you are not doing very well, not only your IP is smaller, but your decline is faster. And we see the same pattern also in Bakken. So there's a pattern going on. So basically the thing to consider is these are the wells that are not having all the frac stages being productive. Those are the 6 out of 10. This is a little bit marginal better. Maybe you're having 7 or 8 frac stages that are working out better. And of course, the top one, the top tier is where you're doing essentially very good selective frac stages. Local stress conditions is very important, and this is very important for India as well as in China as well as in Australia. Okay, the drilling conditions are really getting very tough in China. And in certain places, the terrain is also not so good, so they're backing off in some of those places. In Australia, because of the strike-slip stress, you cannot put these, transverse frac stages. You have to put longitudinal. That makes the wells very expensive. I'm not so sure yet over here, but in India, but I'm sure some of those conditions might be present. Infrastructure. One of the main reasons that the shale revolution in North America took off just like that, because if I drilled a well today, I could get money and sell the gas or oil tomorrow. That was one of the prime reasons. Now, if I take a look at India, the point was already pointed out that India does not have as much pipeline anywhere close to than the US, but it's not too bad. You have about 20,000 kilometers of oil pipeline, about 12,000 kilometers of gas pipeline, and if I'm not mistaken, another 10,000 kilometers is being planned for 2016 and 2017. That's a good start. Talents and skills. Basically, if you take a look at the talents and skill, the first question to ask from the reservoir side is, how different is the unconventional workflow compared to the conventional workflow? The short answer is that the workflow is no different. You go through the same process, defining your reservoir, deciding how many fracs you need, doing your economics, and doing any regeneration that you might want to do. The workflow is not different. What is different is how you build your reservoir. You need the new parameters, TOC, thermal maturity, okay, lithophases. All those new things are that we don't worry about conventionals, where we mostly worry about saturation, porosity, and permeability. On the operational talent and skills, it's very important to understand the process, because it sounds very simple. You put a horizontal well and you do multi-stage fracturing, but there's a lot of things that goes into it, and that's why a lot of NOCs are getting very smart, where they have sent their people and have them work with local operators to see what works and what doesn't work. So I'm sure companies over here are doing that. I know of one or two companies that are, so hopefully that's going to carry on. So I'm coming to my concluding remarks, which is basically, I think a lot of panelists have already pointed out, each unconventional play has its own characteristics in terms of the resource and associated exploitation and development strategies. Yet, there are certain things that you can take, which is the primary two things that you can take is what I pointed out, is sweet spots for my wells and sweet spots for my frac stages. Another thing is that it is tempting, I did not mention in the talk, it is tempting to look for analogs. An analog can be more costly. As a matter of fact, 8 out of 10 analogs that I see all over the world is all Eagle Ford. I think it's wishful thinking. That's, because, it's got a good gas, good oil, so it's a wishful thinking. What is also important to figure out is what not to do, as well as what to do. And at the risk in international development will be there, so there needs to have a balance between cost and revenue potential. And finally, be mindful of your talent and skills requirement, which we heard earlier in the morning, as a matter of fact, needs to be planned ahead. Thank you very much for your time.